fair relates to the point that I made a few moments ago about the Indigenous population, but also the remote and rural populations of the state, where all of those other factors that I've talked about are a bigger problem than they are right here in Brisbane. And those of you who go and visit Indigenous or remote or rural regions of Queensland will see where those 62% of overweight and obese people live, and all of the other suffering that sits around that. So we actually have to. The target in that case is probably the least scientific of the group. Actually, but it's a very interesting one. It's to increase the proportion of our population that are involved in volunteering. Like Mike volunteered for every job that anyone asked him to do. That sort of person is the sort of person we need in Queensland. Volunteering, and the sort of thing that Nicola did when she rang up and said, I'd like to help you guys organise ANZAAS, or that Jackie did when she joined in the party, etc. It's an interesting measure of the way in which people like you actually ultimately make a difference to a society like ours, and I think it's probably a useful measure in that respect. And the last one is SMART, and the target there are two targets. One of them relates to preschool training, preschool attendance, and the other one, which is probably more significant to this group, but both of them are ultimately very significant, is to increase by 50% the number of people that are trained at tertiary or technical qualifications, from about 50% at the moment to about 75% of our population by 2020. And so that one comes right back to the whole question of ANZAAS and science, technology, engineering and mathematics training. So, as I said, I'll come back and I've been going an hour already anyway. I'll come back and answer any questions you have about how that all works. But one of my jobs is we have a thing called the Smart State Council, which is chaired by the Premier, and I chair a standing committee. Basically, the standing committee's job is to provide the Premier and senior ministers with reports on interesting issues around the smart state and whether we might go and how we might do it. But with the advent of these new Q2 targets, that group is being restructured to bring on board people that have skills in each of those 5 areas, and our job will be basically to keep government honest in the sense that we will be providing an annual report back to the Premier and senior ministers on how it's going. Are we actually getting somewhere? Not the sort of level that says, how are you going quantitatively on going from 46 tonnes down to however many tonnes, but much more on the general tenor of the direction, whether there are completely other things that we should be doing, whether, that sort of more the qualitative stuff than the quantitative stuff, which will be done by a specialised unit in the Premier's Department. Okay, so I won't talk any more about Q2 targets, but let me just continue on then with the relevance of that last one, the educational bit. Queensland, you would have all heard recently the results of the numeracy and literacy tests in Queensland that placed us from a position where we were 10 or so years ago at the head of the pack in Australia to very near the bottom of the pack in terms of the literacy and numeracy of our students. That led to the state government again to initiate an independent inquiry by Jeff Masters, who recently put forward his report, which you would have seen, and the government is currently developing a response to that. Separately from that, the Smart State Council that I mentioned before did a report actually chaired by John Mack, the guy that I mentioned who worked with me at the start of IMB, on the state of education in Queensland, which concluded that in particular for science, technology, engineering and mathematics education, we were well and truly behind the 8 ball. That led to the Education Queensland being tasked with developing a 10-year STEM training plan, which they did, but ultimately that wasn't published by the Minister at the time, Rod Welford, because I guess financial constraints as much as anything else led it to be a fairly different document. And Rod asked me to chair a small group to come up with a new one. That was in last November. Mary Rowland sitting up back there was one of the members of that committee, and said, give us a new STEM plan for how we're going to train you in this state in science and technology and engineering and mathematics by February, so I can take it to Cabinet before the election. Well, we did. We gave it to him in February, but the election came a bit early, and it is still to go to Cabinet, I hope, sometime in the next few weeks. But so I can't give you copies of it or wave it around because it's still at that stage in the process. But I can tell you what the outcomes of that were, and I think it's probably important coming back to ANZAAS. The first outcome was that ultimately the quality of the best education systems in the world are driven by the quality of the teaching workforce. And McKinsey's did a report on this subject 2 or 3 years ago now, where they produced chapter and verse on that subject, and pointed out that, for example, they first of all selected the half dozen best education systems around the globe in terms of their performance, and then secondly they looked at what was common to those. So Finland was one, Singapore was one, South Korea was another. What was common to them was that they all draw their teaching workforce from the top 30% of graduates, of school leavers, basically. I mean, there are various measures. It's not just school leavers, because obviously some people come into teaching from other courses, but to the top 30% of the possible intake community, if they get the right definition. Finland goes to the top 10%. In Queensland, we draw our future teaching workforce basically through the middle third. In those of you who know about OP schools, I guess most of you would, ranging from 1 at the top to 25 at the bottom. You can get into a teacher training program in Queensland with an OP score of 18. That probably isn't what most of us would want for a person training to be the teacher of our children or grandchildren. So the first recommendation coming out of the first step in the STEM plan that we proposed, which I hope will continue to go forward, is that we need to dramatically improve the quality of the intake into our teacher training program. Now that, of course, has difficulties. I mean, whilst teaching, by and large, whilst you have that situation in place, it's a sort of a self-fulfilling cycle. If you have a course like medicine where you have to have an OP of 1 or 2, then that encourages the 1 or 2s to go into it. So you've got a situation you have to change, including the level of respect that our community has for the teaching profession. It's an absolutely key part of the thing. And again, it comes back, I think, to the goals of ANZAAS in science teaching in particular, to bring home the importance of the teaching component of that. And those scientists, amongst others, as key players in our community. So we suggested that we needed to raise the level of intake, and our suggestion was to raise it to the point where the top third, and the exact definition of what the top third means is a little difficult in terms of OP scores because of the various places people come in. But anyway, the top third. That we change the nature of the courses that we provide in teacher training in our universities so that the people teaching actually learn some science. It's a mathematics. I know I can see that you think that's a shocking suggestion. Actually have them learning some scientists and some mathematicians, some science and maths as part of the deal, and to have that at 3 different levels so that people teaching in years 10, 11, 12, science teachers, maths teachers, and 10, 11, 12 actually have a master's degree in their discipline, excuse me, that people teaching in the Year 6 through Year 9 area who would be specialist maths teachers and science teachers within their schools and within those year groups would have a minimum of 8 subjects through their 4-year degrees in science and maths, and that the kids, the ones teaching 1 to 5s would have a couple.